The dust hangs with a stillness that feels deliberate, like the room has been holding its breath for decades, waiting for the return of someone who once stood here and promised resolution yet left with more questions than answers. The floorboards yield the faint scent of dry timber, stale air, archived memory. In the center of the space, untouched for years, the soft outline of yellowed tape shows where her world became a file label and a date stamp. Nothing has shifted. Nothing has healed. The silence is not peaceful. It simply lingers, suspended, observant. He steps in without ceremony, coat brushing the doorway, fingertips grazing the wall as if acknowledging a familiar ache. Investigator Leon Mercer does not say a word, but his presence is enough to stir the dust into brief motion, a muted snowfall returning to stillness. He has rehearsed this arrival countless times in his mind, yet standing here again, inside the hushed geometry of memory, his breath feels measured, almost borrowed. Her name returns first. Maribel Arctura, age 29 at the time. A researcher, precise, soft-spoken, known for cataloging botanical species in desert valleys not far from this county line. She lived alone, but not in isolation. Colleagues described her as gentle, careful, persistent. She had a way of listening to plants. Someone once wrote in a comment line on the original intake sheet, words that read almost poetic against the procedural template of the report. Mercer stands over the marked circle that once held her final outline, not dramatized, not sensational, just traced, recorded, filed. He remembers how the air felt that day, arid but faintly metallic, like dust warmed too quickly by morning sun. He closes his eyes, not to indulge sorrow but to reconstruct accuracy. Investigative clarity, he reminds himself, not sentiment. A photo rests on the table, ethereal in its faded hue. Maribel, sun hat tilted, desert horizon behind her, smile effortless yet contained. Mercer's hand pauses before lifting it, as though touching the image risks altering its integrity. The edges of the photograph curl with age, the emulsion thinning, memory dissolving into paper. She looks directly at the lens, unaware of the stillness her life would leave behind. He breathes in. Dust, old paper, the faint musk of storage boxes, a scent of time curated rather than lived. He moves to the next object, a field journal, leather-bound, spine perfectly straight. Inside, page 2 holds the final entry, precise handwriting, not hurried, no indication of dread or anticipation. Line after line describes desert flora, soil pH, sunlight intervals, normalcy recorded with scientific discipline. It was never the scene that felt incomplete, only the interpretation. Mercer recalls the quiet murmurs in the briefing room back then, colleagues discussing leads with more hope than logic. They spoke of unknown callers, vague sightings, mysterious vehicles, noise without direction. He was younger then, faster to conclude, slower to listen. Now, years later, he approaches the file with a different posture. The silence is no longer adversarial, it is instructive. He sits, places the field journal beside the photograph, opens the original folder. Pages whisper their fatigue, the static edge of thermal paper, the soft grating of ink. He reads the summary slowly, tracing each line with an internal metronome. Time of discovery, approximate timeline, personal belongings accounted for. Last known contact from her colleague, Dr. Renee Calder, who had spoken to Maribel the morning prior about seed specimen data. Calder's statement reads short, factual. She sounded content, focused. No elaboration, no personal reflection. Mercer pauses over her name. Calder had been the most stable variable in the old inquiry. Calm, articulate, cooperative. No contradictions in testimony. Yet something about her phrasing always felt too aligned, too composed. Not deceptive, just refined beyond natural cadence. He turns to the evidence list. Items sealed, logged, preserved. Camera, sample vials, journal, compass, and a folded sheet of printed correspondence, an accepted research funding notice from a private botanical foundation that encouraged independent study. He remembers brushing past it during the initial review, assuming irrelevance. Funding had not been considered a lead. He lifts it now, reads again. No flourish, just polite approval. But down in the signature line below typed text, a handwritten note appears. Your desert catalog will change everything we understand. The ink is smooth, blue, confident. This was not casual praise. It implied significance she had only begun to explore. He sets the letter next to the journal and photographs, forming a quiet constellation of her last documented purpose. Maribel's work, not her personal life, formed the central axis of her final days. This space, too, reflects that: no signs of disruption, no forced entry, nothing missing except continuity. Mercer breaks the silence with a single word, barely audible. Why? Not dramatic, just procedural. Why here, why then, why her? His memory reconstructs the floor pattern. The markers indicated no struggle. The timestamp placed everything in late afternoon, when the sun slants soft amber through the small windows and shadows lengthen without urgency. He presses his palm flat against the table surface. Warm once, cold now. He finds the internal shift. This is not a scene of abrupt loss but of halted momentum. A life paused mid-research, mid-thought, mid-step. He picks up the audio transcript next, a thin sheet typed with short lines. Calder's voice, recorded during her initial interview. She valued precision, always. The desert wasn't isolation for her, it was clarity. Mercer studies those words, not their overt meaning but their subtext. Precision, clarity, both are scientific virtues but also emotional shelters. Maribel may have found order in the vastness, logic in the harsh quiet of desert topography. He imagines her kneeling beside a rare seedling, nomming it with reverence, documenting its bloom cycle with the same seriousness granted to major discoveries. He senses the weight in his chest, not grief, not regret, but unresolved responsibility. A soft echo crosses the building, wood settling or air shifting. The atmosphere remains expectant. He returns to the folder, finds a supplemental note he does not remember noticing before. A small slip of paper wedged between analysis forms, typed cleanly. Specimen origin confirmed, variance minimal but decisive. No date, no signature, just those words. He reads it again, variance minimal but decisive. He repeats the phrasing silently, letting it settle. This was not casual lab language. It implied a discovery subtle yet conclusive. He aligns the slip with her final journal entry, where she wrote, just 2 lines above the last notation. Desert holds constellations beneath soil if documented with patience. He hears it suddenly, the logic, not coincidence, not random. Her work pointed to a species classification she believed would redefine an ecological lineage. Not dramatic, simply influential. He leans back, eyes traveling the perimeter of the space. When he first stood here in 1997, he believed this room held only silence. Now it speaks differently, not loud, not desperate, but certain. Maribel's life was not interrupted by chaos. It was intersected by discovery. Her notes, her correspondence, her funding approval, all orbit one premise. She was on the edge of confirming something the field had not yet articulated. Mercer closes the file, not out of dismissal but to reorganize thought. Each detail is a fragment, each fragment a quiet step. He returns to the circle marked on the floor. The sunlight falls exactly as it did in the old case photos, gentle, indifferent. He kneels, not ceremonially, only to align perspective. If she stood here last, what did she see? The table, the samples, the letter. A horizon beyond the window offering endless terrain, a landscape she understood with intimate clarity. He whispers, barely shaping sound, "You were right." Not a eulogy, not closure, just recognition. He rises slowly. The building remains still. Justice, he knows, is procedural, linear, unemotional. Yet its machinery brushes against something fragile, human intention, interrupted trajectory. He collects the photograph, the journal, the letter, aligning them carefully inside the folder. As he prepares to leave, the dust settles once more into its quiet suspension, as though the room resumes its long-held breath. Outside, he pauses on the threshold, letting desert air fill his lungs. Dry, crisp, honest. The past remains intact, but perception has shifted delicately, irrevocably. He steps forward, folder in hand, carrying not conclusion but clarity. He feels it quietly, not resolution, just a steadier understanding. He does not drive directly to the station. Procedure would dictate immediate cataloging, updated chain of evidence, formal re-entry into the system. Instead, Mercer pulls into the old county storage annex on the edge of town, where temperature-controlled lockers preserve unsolved fragments of lives in sealed envelopes and coded drawers. The building hums with mechanical consistency, light fixtures steady, floors without echo. The air is controlled, gentler than the raw dryness outside. Here, evidence is not history, it is pause. He signs in without conversation. The clerk acknowledges him only by a measured nod. Familiarity without narrative. Everything here functions in the language of process, not curiosity. He walks the narrow corridor, passing units labeled by year, each holding the quiet weight of unresolved detail. 1989, 1993, 1997. He stops at the latter, unlocks the designated compartment, and places Maribel's folder in the empty slot it once occupied. The hinge clicks with practiced precision. He stands still for a moment, viewing the shelves in their calm order. No sound except the low mechanical breath of climate regulation. The guilt that once edged his perspective feels thinner now, not absent but tempered. This was never neglect, it was misalignment. Evidence had always existed, simply unrecognized through younger eyes. A whisper of paper draws his attention back to the folder before he closes it fully. The letter, he removes it again, reading the handwritten note at the bottom. Words that felt encouraging once now suggest intent. Your desert catalog will change everything we understand. Encouragement, yes, but also pressure. Not forceful, not harmful, just determinative. He recalls Calder's tone when speaking of Maribel, respectful, understated, never sentimental. Scientific colleagues share precision rather than nostalgia, yet something about Calder's restrained brevity stands out now. Nothing overt, nothing structural, simply a calibration of memory too exact. Mercer replays their conversation from the day of discovery. Calder sat at the end of the table, voice low, posture composed. She did not seek acknowledgement, she had said. She pursued clarity. At the time, it sounded like mourning wrapped in professionalism. Now it feels more like observation from a distance too careful, a sentiment curated. He returns the folder, locks the compartment, exits into desert light. The sun hovers in quiet symmetry across a pale horizon. He drives toward the county observatory, an unlikely destination for a botanist's case, but connected through data sharing. Maribel had occasionally collaborated with atmospheric researchers to compare arid bloom periods with solar exposure cycles. Mundane coincidences become subtle threads when viewed through a lens sharpened by years. Inside, a technician acknowledges him with brief recognition. Mercer does not explain his arrival. He simply requests archive access. The technician hands him a login slate, no questions, no inflection of curiosity. This environment, too, abides by silence. The database opens with subdued clarity. Dates, correspondence logs, request filings, specimen timestamps. Maribel's name appears intermittently, her submissions concise. Each entry shows careful timing in relation to field samples. He cross-references the funding approval letter date with her last recorded submission. The timeline is precise, her final specimen logged just 3 days before the letter arrived. He scrolls slowly, absorbing patterns without presumption. The data suggests consistent observation, nothing erratic. Yet her last entry differs subtly, not in language but in volume. She recorded not one specimen but 3 distinct variants of the same desert bloom. Minimal variance, decisive variance. The words return. He prints the final submission sheet, folds it without creating hard creases, and places it in his coat pocket. This is not revelation, not a sudden unraveling. It is incremental recognition, the kind Maribel herself would have trusted. Outside, the desert carries a quiet tone, neither harsh nor inviting. Sand shifts without visible wind. Mercer leans against his vehicle, not resting but aligning thought. Her discovery, if classified correctly, would not transform ecosystems but refine lineage. A change subtle enough to be overlooked yet significant enough to adjust scientific frameworks built for decades. It was not dramatic in impact, but exact. She lived in the margin where details shape understanding. He recalls the final note found in her journal. Desert holds constellations beneath soil if documented with patience. Not poetic excess, just factual metaphor. She was mapping not just specimens but connections. His phone vibrates, a restrained alert. A message from records. Calder has requested release of her original testimony transcript. Mercer notes the timing. Years of silence, and only now does Calder revisit documentation. He does not interpret urgency, he interprets alignment. Investigative instinct recognizes correlation without assigning motive. He drives to Calder's residence, a modest home outside town, surrounded by pragmatic landscaping, xerophytes arranged in logical precision. She answers on the second knock, expression steady, voice the same low control from before. "Investigator," she says, not warm, not distant. He nods, steps inside only when she shifts slightly to allow entry. The living room mirrors her manner, organized, unsentimental, sparse but intentional. Books arranged not by genre but by discipline. He sits, she remains standing, hands folded. "You return to her sight," she says, statement not question. He meets her gaze, yes. A slow inhalation from her side. Not tremor, not emotion, simply breath. "You found something unreviewed." He does not answer. Silence here is not evasive but structural. Calder moves to the bookshelf, withdrawing a small binder. She sets it on the table with delicate placement. Inside are correspondence copies, research exchanges between her and Maribel, professional, courteous, exact. "We studied separately," Calder says, "to avoid influencing each other's classifications." He turns pages. Each letter is dated, sequential, restrained. They debated variance ranges, specimen mapping, survivability under extreme exposure. Their final exchange contains a note from Maribel, confirmation likely, will submit in full when prepared. Mercer reads her words twice. Confirmation likely. Calm, precise. No urgency, no trepidation. Discovery was progression, not breakthrough. Calder watches him. She did not anticipate interruption. He hears the subtle shift, not in tone but in implication. Not that she feared interruption, simply that it was not part of her framework. He closes the binder softly. "You kept this quiet," he says. "I kept it intact," Calder replies. He registers the distinction. Quiet implies concealment. Intact implies preservation. "Her work mattered," Calder continues, "not because it altered the world, but because it clarified it." Mercer absorbs the sentence. Clarified, not changed. Her final note in the journal, the funding letter, the specimen report, all align in understated certainty. He stands. Calder does not follow. Their exchange ends without farewell. He leaves with the binder in his possession, a transfer she does not formally acknowledge. Back in the vehicle, he opens it once more. One letter stands apart, dated a week before Maribel's final day. "Your conclusion may reach beyond classification," Calder wrote. "Careful, precision requires distance." Distance. He sets the binder on the passenger seat. The desert remains steady outside, an expanse without narrative, only pattern. Mercer understands now. The twist is not conflict, not interference, not hidden motive. It is simple alignment. Maribel's conclusion was correct yet quiet, groundbreaking only in the language of precision. Her final days were not shaped by threat but by culmination. The case had lingered not because of obscurity, but because its answer lacked dramatic contour. Justice prefers arcs, science accepts lines. He returns to the station before dusk. The sky shifts to amber, reflecting against the low windows. Inside, he files the new material with steady motion. No announcement, no internal memorandum. Completion here is procedural. He writes a single-line addendum to the case file. Conclusion supported by original research trajectory. No conflict indicators. His hand pauses before signing. He feels the quiet weight, not loss, not resolution, simply the calibration of truth. In the evidence room, light remains constant, temperature even. The folder rests now with context restored, discovery acknowledged. Mercer stands alone, coat draped without movement, silence unbroken. The building hums its low, impartial tone. Justice continues, unemotional, linear. Yet something human remains, an understanding not loud, not celebrated, not final, just present. Maribel's work endures not by recognition but by precision. He leaves the room, the hallway, the annex, stepping into dusk where color fades without performance. He breathes a measured intake. Not closure, continuity. The station after hours carries a tone of muted continuation. No chatter, no urgency, no reactive pace. Just hallway lights set to half power, casting long geometric lines over tile. Mercer moves through them without disrupting their stillness. He has filed what needed to be filed. The evidence rests not in triumph but in calibration. Outside, the desert cools with an almost ceremonial calm. He does not go home. Instead, he returns to the original site once more, not compelled by doubt but by clarity. The building stands exactly as it did in the first hours of the case. Wood panels soft with age, windows holding the day's final light, air quietly dense with time. He enters with measured intent, each footstep respectful, unhurried. Inside, the dust appears less like residue and more like record. The floor shows the same untouched outline of tapped measurement, the soft, rectangular discoloration where she once worked. The atmosphere feels paused, not vacant. Evidence is gone now, but imprint remains. He sets the binder from Calder on the table. The pages flutter only slightly, controlled by a slow current of settling air. He opens the final correspondence again, not to search but to witness. Precision requires distance. He repeats the line silently. The phrase is not warning, not resistance, only professional truth between colleagues accustomed to scientific restraint. He stands in the exact place where her journal once lay open. If she were here, she would have cataloged that final bloom not as revelation but as iteration. A small variance that reorients classification, not shatters it. That was her strength, quiet proof, not spectacle. He kneels, fingertips just above the wooden grain, remembering the first day he stood in this room decades ago. He was younger then, his instinct shaped by expectation of narrative crescendo, twist, confession, error. But Maribel's work held none of those contours. Her discovery lived in subtlety, in the margin where accuracy replaces drama. He rises slowly, returns to the table, and removes from his coat pocket the printed specimen report from the observatory archives. 3 variants, nearly identical but not truly identical. The difference was too slight for immediate recognition, yet too exact for dismissal. That was the pivot. Not conflict, not secrecy, just precision beyond the pace of interpretation at the time. For years, this case carried the suggestion of unfinished story, not because the work lacked clarity, but because the conclusion lacked spectacle. A life ended mid-thought, not by force but by timing. Work near completion, not fully filed. The world often expects endings with pronounced definition. Science operates differently. Progression continues whether acknowledged or not. Mercer closes the report carefully, flattening no edges. He hears the old floor creak just once as temperature shifts. The sound is not startling, only honest. He steps toward the window. Outside, desert twilight smooths into indigo. The terrain that Maribel wandered, studied, annotated now stretches in calm continuity, unchanged by human inquiry, unchanged by archival years. It exists with its own quiet permanence. He imagines her final morning, the methodical packing of sample vials, field camera, compass, journal. Not rushed, not restless. Just another day of documentation, another step in her catalog. She did not chase breakthrough. She traced it with the same patience she granted every seedling, every soil layer, every bloom cycle. He speaks her name once, not loudly. Maribel, not lament, not apology, simply presence. His voice folds into the atmosphere, absorbed by wood, dust, light. He gathers the binder and specimen sheet, but leaves no physical adjustment to the room. Nothing shifts, nothing is corrected. He exits the same way she once did, quietly, assuming continuation. Outside, night settles with exact rhythm. Stars appear in disciplined intervals. The air carries mineral steadiness. Mercer stands beside the doorway, taking in the structure one last time. Not farewell, just acknowledgement. He drives back through the long county road, headlights cutting only what is necessary. The rest of the landscape remains in dignified shadow. The horizon resembles a closed archive, vast, intact, neutral. At the station, he logs the binder in supplemental file storage. Not as confidential material, not as revelation, but as context. Every document now aligned, every datum now given its correct decimal place. His summary, added earlier, is already stamped. No narrative flourish, no expository finale. Just a line reaffirming the integrity of her work and the absence of any disruptive element. The case is not sensationally solved. It is contextually completed. Mercer removes his coat, placing it on the chair with measured precision. He sits at his desk without switching the overhead light to full brightness. Half-light suits the tone. Reports around him remain static, neutral figures awaiting interpretation. He opens Maribel's photograph again, the one with the sun hat, horizon behind her, posture composed. He looks at her expression not for message, not for hidden indicator, but for authenticity. She existed not in pursuit of acclaim, but of detail. She cataloged the world as it is, not as story. His reflection in the desk surface is faint, blurred by low light. He studies it only briefly, recognizing a shift not in identity but in comprehension. Sometimes clarity is not loud. Sometimes resolution arrives without arc, without crescendo. The clock on the wall continues its steady progress. Not urgent, not symbolic, just time. He places the photograph back into the file, aligning corners with quiet care. In doing so, he senses what remains, an understanding that justice, too, functions best when stripped of performance. Her life was not a puzzle to decode, not a conflict to expose. It was a sequence of exact observations interrupted gently by finality. He turns off the desk lamp, allowing the room to return to its ambient dim. He does not linger in contemplation. He simply stands, adjusts coat, and walks toward the exit. In the corridor, the lights still cast their geometric pattern across tile. His steps do not break symmetry. He moves through them like a notation completing its measure. Outside, the night is still steady. Nevada air rests without tension, without question. He locks the station door behind him, not ceremonially but habitually. The horizon does not speak, does not conclude. It continues. The desert, the research, the classification, quiet, exact, enduring. Mercer pauses once more before entering his vehicle, not to revisit thought, not to assign meaning, only to breathe the same air she once studied, dry, clear, constant. Justice, in the end, is mechanical, but understanding is not. It lives in the silent interval where detail aligns, where nothing dramatic occurs yet everything resolves. He starts the engine, drives into night, and lets the road take him forward without narrative. Nothing breaks, nothing finishes, something simply remains.